All right, so this is the second part of chapter 14. Mazer wakened him before morning. The clock said 0340, and Ender felt groggy as he padded along the corridor behind Mazer. Early to bed and early to rise, Mazer intoned, makes a man stupid and blind in the eyes. He had been dreaming that buggers were vivisecting him, only instead of cutting open his body, they were cutting up his memories and displaying them like holographs and trying to make sense of them. It was a very odd dream, and Ender really couldn't no, and Ender couldn't easily shake loose of it, even as he walked through the tunnels to the simulator room. The buggers tormented him in his sleep, and Mazer wouldn't leave him alone when he was awake. Between the two of them, he had no rest. Ender forced himself awake. Apparently, Mazer meant it when he said he meant to break Ender down, and forcing him to play when tired and sleepy was just the sort of cheap and easy trick Ender should have expected. Well, today, it wouldn't work. He got to the simulator and found his squadron leaders already on the wire waiting for him. There was no enemy yet, so he divided them into two armies and began a mock battle, commanding both sides so he could control the test that each of his leaders was going through. They began slowly, but soon were vigorous and alert. Then simulator field went blank. The ships disappeared and everything changed at once. At the near edge of the simulator field, they could see the shapes, drawn in holographic light, of three starships from the human fleet. Each would have 12 fighters. The enemy, obviously aware of the human presence, had formed a globe with a single ship at the center. Ender was not fooled. It would not be a queen ship. The buggers outnumbered Ender's fighter force by 2 to 1, but they were also grouped much closer together than they should have been. Dr. Device would be able to do much more damage than the enemy expected. Ender selected one starship, made it blink in the simulator field, and spoke into the microphone. Ally, this is yours. Assign Petra and Vlad to the fighters as you wish. He assigned the other two starships with their fighter forces, except for one fighter from each starship that he reserved for Bean. Slip the wall and get below them, Bean, unless they start chasing you. Then run back to the reserves for safety. Otherwise, get in a place where I can call on you for quick results. Ally, form your force into a compact assault at one point in their globe. Don't fire until I tell you this is maneuver only. This one's easy, Ender, Ally said. It's easy, so why not be careful? I'd like to do this without the loss of a single ship. Ender grouped his reserves in two forces that shadowed Ally at a distance. Bean was already off the simulator, though Ender occasionally flipped to Bean's point of view to keep track of where he was. It was Ally, however, who played the delicate game with the enemy. He was in a bullet-shaped formation and probed the enemy globe. Whenever he came near, the bugger ships pulled back, as if to draw him in toward the ship in the center. Ally skimmed to the side. The bugger ships kept up with him, withdrawing wherever he was close, returning to the sphere pattern when he had passed. Feint, withdraw, skim the globe to another point, withdraw again, feint again, and then Ender said, Go on in, Ally. His bullet started in, while he said to Ender, You know they'll just let me through and surround me and eat me alive. Just ignore that ship in the middle. Whatever you say, boss. Sure enough, the globe began to contract. Ender brought the reserves forward. The enemy ships concentrated on the side of the globe nearer the reserves. Attack them there, where they're most concentrated, Ender said. This defies 4,000 years of military history, said Ally, moving his fighters forward. We're supposed to attack where we outnumber them. In this simulation, they obviously don't know what our weapons can do. It'll only work once, but let's make it spectacular. Fire at will. Ally did. The simulation responded beautifully. First one or two, then a dozen, then most of the enemy ships exploded in dazzling light as the field leapt from ship to ship in the tight formation. Stay out of the way, Ender said. The ships on the far side of the globe formation were not affected by the chain reaction, but it was a simple matter to hunt them down and destroy them. Bean took care of stragglers that tried to escape toward his end of space. The battle was over. It had been easier than most of their recent exercises. Mazer shrugged when Ender told him so. This is a simulation of a real invasion. There had to be one battle in which they didn't know what we could do. Now your work begins. Try not to be too arrogant about the victory. I'll give you the real challenges soon enough. Ender practiced 10 hours a day with his squadron leaders, but not all at once. He gave them a few hours in the afternoon to rest. Simulated battles under Mazer's supervision came every 2 or 3 days, and, as Mazer had promised, they were never so easy again. The enemy quickly abandoned its attempt to surround Ender and never again grouped its forces closely enough to allow a chain reaction. There was something new every time, something harder. Sometimes Ender had only a single starship and 8 fighters. Once the enemy dodged through an asteroid belt. Sometimes the enemy left stationary traps, large installations that blew up if Ender brought one of his squadrons too close, often crippling or destroying some of Ender's ships. "You cannot absorb losses," Mazer shouted at him after one battle. "When you get into a real battle, you won't have the luxury of an infinite supply of computer-generated fighters. You'll have what you brought with you and nothing more. Now get used to fighting without unnecessary waste." "It wasn't unnecessary waste," Ender said. I can't win battles if I'm so terrified of losing a ship that I never take any risks." Mazer smiled. "Excellent, Ender. You're beginning to learn. But in a real battle, you would have superior officers, and worst of all, civilians, shouting these things at you. Now, if the enemy had to react—" What? No. "Now, if the enemy had been at all bright, they would have caught you here and taken Tom's squadron." Together they went over the battle. In the next practice, Ender would show his leaders what Mazer had shown him, and they'd learn to cope with it the next time they saw it. They thought they had been ready before, that they had worked smoothly together as a team. Now, though, having fought enough real challenges together, they all began to trust each other more than ever, and battles became exhilarating. They told Peter that the ones who weren't actually playing would come into the simulator rooms and watch. Ender imagined what it would be like to have his friends there with him, cheering, or laughing, or gasping with apprehension. Sometimes he thought it would be a great distraction, but other days he wished for it with all of his heart. Even when he had spent his long days lying out in the sunlight on a raft by a bike, no, even when he even when he had spent his days lying out in the sunlight on a raft in a lake, he had not been so lonely. Mazer Rackham was his companion, was his teacher, but was not his friend. Intense. All right. He made no complaint, though. Mazer had told him there would be no pity, and his private unhappiness meant nothing to anyone. Most of the time, it meant nothing even to Ender. He kept his mind on the game, trying to learn from the battles, and not just the particular lessons of that battle, but what the buggers might have done if they had been more clever, and how Ender would react if they did it in the future. He lived with past battles and future battles both, waking and sleeping, and he drove his squadron leaders with an intensity that occasionally provoked rebelliousness. "You're too kind to us," said Ally one day. "Why don't you get annoyed with us for not being brilliant every moment of every practice? If you keep coddling us like this, we'll think you like us." Some of the others laughed into their microphones. Ender recognized the irony, of course, and answered with a long silence. When he finally spoke, he ignored Ally's complaint. "Again," he said, "and this time without self-pity. They did it again, and did it right." But as their trust in Ender as a commander grew, their friendship remembered from the battle school days gradually disappeared. It was to each other that they became close. It was with each other that they exchanged confidences. Ender was their teacher and commander, as distant from them as Mazer was from him, and as demanding. They fought all the better for it, and Ender was not distracted from his work, at least not while he was awake. As he drifted off to sleep each night, it was with thoughts of the simulator playing through his mind. But in the night he thought of other things. Often he remembered the corpse of the giant, decaying steadily. He did not remember it, though, in the pixels of the picture on his desk. Instead, it was real, the faint odor of death still lingering near it. Things were changed in his dreams. The little village that had grown up between the giant's ribs was composed of buggers now, and they saluted him gravely, like gladiators greeting Caesar before they died for his entertainment. He did not hate the buggers in his dream, uh, and even though he knew that they had hidden their queen from him, he did not try to search for her. He always left the giant's body quickly, and when he got to the playground, the children were always there. Woven, Wolven, not woven, Wolven and mocking. They wore faces that he knew. Sometimes Peter, and sometimes Balso, sometimes Stilson and Bernard. And just as often, though, the savage creatures were Ally and Shen, Dink and Petra. Sometimes one of them would be Valentine, and in his dream he also shoved her under the water and waited for her to drown. She writhed in his hands, fought to come up, but was at last was still. He dragged her out of the lake and onto the raft, where she lay with her face in the rictus of death. He screamed and wept over her, crying again and again that it was a game, he was only playing. Then Mazer Rackham shook him awake. You were calling out in your sleep, he said. Sorry, Ender said. Never mind, it's time for another battle. Steadily the pace increased. There were usually 2 battles a day now, and Ender held practices to a minimum. He would use the time while the others rested to pore over the replays of past games, trying to spot his own weaknesses, trying to guess what would happen next. Sometimes he was fully prepared for the enemy's innovation. Sometimes he was not. I think you're cheating, Ender told Mazer one day. Oh? You can observe my practice sessions. You can see what I'm working on. You seem to be ready for everything I do. Most of what you see is computer simulations, Mazer said. The computer is programmed to respond to your innovations only after you use them once in battle. Then the computer is cheating. You need to get more sleep, Ender. But he could not sleep. He lay awake longer and longer each night, and his sleep was less restful. He woke too often in the night, whether he was waking up to think more about the game or to escape from his dreams, he wasn't sure. It was as if someone rode him in his sleep, forcing him to wander through his worst nightmares, through his worst memories, to live in them again as if they were real. Nights were so real that days began to seem dreamlike to him. He began to worry that he would not think clearly enough, that he would be too tired when he played. Always, when the game began, the intensity of it awoke him, but if his mental abilities began to slip, he wondered, would he notice it? And he seemed to be slipping. He never had a battle anymore in which he did not lose at least a few fighters. Several times the enemy was able to trick him into exposing more weakness than he meant to. Other times the enemy was able to wear him down by attrition until his victory was as much a matter of luck as strategy. Mazer would go over the game with a look of contempt on his face. Look at this, he would say. You didn't have to do this. And Ender would return to practice with his leaders, trying to keep up their morale, but sometimes letting slip his disappointment with their weaknesses, the fact that they made mistakes. Sometimes we make mistakes, Petra whispered to him once. It was a plea for help. And sometimes we don't, Ender answered her. If she got help, it would not be from him. He would teach. Let her find her friends among the others. Then came a battle that nearly ended in disaster. Petra led her force too far. They were exposed, and she discovered it in a moment when Ender wasn't with her. In only a few moments, she had lost all but two of her ships. Ender found her then, ordered her to move them in a certain direction. She didn't answer. There was no movement, and in a moment those two fighters too would be lost. Ender knew at once that he had pushed her too hard. Because of her brilliance, he had called on her to play far more often and called on her to play, yeah, far more often and under much more demanding circumstances than all but a few of the others. But he had no time now to worry about Petra or to feel guilty about what he had done to her. He called on Crazy Tom to command the two remaining fighters and went on, trying to salvage the battle. Petra had occupied a key position, and now all of Ender's strategy came apart. If the enemy had not been too eager and clumsy in exploiting their advantage, Ender would have lost. But Shen was able to catch a group of the enemy in too tight a formation and took them out with a single chain reaction. Crazy Tom brought his two surviving fighters in through the gap and caused havoc with the enemy. And though his ships and Shen's as well were finally destroyed, Flymolo was able to mop up and complete the victory. At the end of the battle, he could hear Petra crying out, trying to get a microphone. Tell him I'm sorry. I was just so tired. I couldn't think. That was all. Tell Ender I'm sorry. She was not there for the next few practices, and when she did come back, she was not as quick as she had been, not as daring. Much of what had made her a good commander was lost. Ender couldn't use her anymore, except in routine, closely supervised assignments. She was no fool. She knew what had happened, but she also knew that Ender had no other choice, and told him so. The fact remained that she had broken, and she was far from being the weakest of his squad leaders. It was a warning. He could not press his commanders more than they could bear. Now, instead of using his leaders whenever he needed their skills, he had to keep in mind how often they had fought. He had to spell them off, which meant that sometimes he went into battle with commanders he trusted a little less. As he eased the pressure on them, he increased the pressure on himself. Late one night, he woke up in pain. There was blood on his pillow, the taste of blood in his mouth. His fingers were throbbing. He saw that in his sleep he had been gnawing on his own fist. The blood was still flowing smoothly. Mazer, he called. Rackham woke up and called at once for a doctor. As the doctor treated, I'm sorry, I was about to say something funny. As the doctor treated the wound, Mazer said, I don't care how much you eat, Ender. Self-cannibalism won't get you out of this school. I was asleep, Ender said. I don't want to get out of command school. Good. The others, the ones who didn't make it. What are you talking about? Before me, your other students who didn't make it through the training, what happened to them? They didn't make it. That's all. We don't punish the ones who fail. They just don't go on. Like Bonso? Bonso? He went home. Not like Bonso. What, then? What happened to them when they failed? Why does it matter, Ender? Ender didn't answer. None of them failed at this point in their course, Ender. You made a mistake with Petra. She'll recover. But Petra is Petra, and you are you. Part of what I am is her, is what she made me. You won't fail, Ender, not this early in the course. You've had some tight ones, but you've always won. You don't know what your limits are yet, but if you've reached them already, you're a good deal feebler than I thought. Do they die? Who? The ones who fail. No, they don't die. Good heavens, boy, you're playing games. I think that Bonso died. I dreamt about it last night. I remembered the way he looked after I jammed his face with my head. I think I must have pushed his nose back into his brain. The blood was coming out of his eyes. I think he was dead right then. It was just a dream. Mazer, I don't want to keep dreaming these things. I'm afraid to sleep. I keep thinking of things that I don't want to remember. My whole life keeps playing out as if I were a recorder and someone else wanted to watch the most terrible parts of my life. We can't drug you if that's what you're hoping for. I'm sorry if you have bad dreams. Should we leave the light on at night? Don't make fun of me, Ender said. I'm afraid I'm going crazy. The doctor was finished with the bandage. Mazer told him he could go. He went. Are you really afraid of that? Mazer asked. Ender thought about it and wasn't sure. In my dreams, said Ender, I'm never sure whether I'm really me. Strange dreams are a safety valve, Ender. I'm putting you under a little pressure for the first time in your life. Your body is finding ways to compensate, that's all. You're a big boy now. It's time to stop being afraid of the night. All right, Ender said. He decided then that he would never tell Mazer about his dreams again. The days wore on with battles every day until at last Ender settled into the routine of the destruction of himself. He began to have pains in his stomach. They put him on a bland diet, but soon he didn't have an appetite for anything at all. Eat, Mazer said, and Ender would mechanically put food in his mouth. But if nobody told him to eat, he didn't eat. Two more of his squadron leaders collapsed the way that Petra had. The pressure on the rest became all the greater. The enemy outnumbered them by 3 or 4 to 1 in every battle now. The enemy also retreated more readily when things went badly, regrouping to keep the battle going longer and longer. Sometimes battles lasted for hours before they finally destroyed the last enemy ship. Ender began rotating his squadron leaders within the same battle, bringing in fresh and rested ones to take the place of those who were beginning to get sluggish. Let me adjust again. Sorry. Sorry. I know this looks like an earthquake from y'all's end. You know, said Bean one time as he took over command of Hot Soup's 4 remaining fighters, this game isn't quite as fun as it used to be. Then, one day in practice, as Ender was drilling his squadron leaders, the room went black, and he woke up on the floor with his face bloody, where he had hit the controls. They put him in bed. They put him in bed then, and for 3 days he was very ill. He remembered seeing faces in his dreams, but they weren't real faces, and he knew it, even while he thought he saw them. He thought he saw Valentine sometimes, and sometimes Peter, sometimes his friends from the battle school, and sometimes sometimes the buggers vivisecting him. Once it seemed very real when he saw Colonel Graff bending over him, speaking softly to him like a kind father. But then he woke up and found only his enemy, Mazer Rackham. I'm awake, said Ender. So I see, Mazer answered. Took you long enough. You have a battle today. So Ender got up and fought the battle and won it. But there was no second battle that day, and they let him go to bed earlier. His hands were shaking as he undressed. During the night, he thought he felt hands touching him gently, hands with affection in them and gentleness. He dreamed he heard voices. You haven't been kind to him. That wasn't the assignment. How long can he go on? He's breaking down. Long enough. It's nearly finished. So soon? A few days, and then he's through. How will he do when he's already like this? Fine. Even today, he fought better than ever. In his dream, the voices sound like Colonel Graff and Mazer Rackham. But that was the way dreams were. The craziest things could happen because he dreamed he heard one of the voices saying, I can't bear to see what this is doing to him. And the other voice answered, I know. I love him too. And then they changed into Valentine and a lie, and in his dream they were burying him. Only a hill grew up, a hill grew up where they laid his body down, and he dried out and became a home for buggers, like the giant was. All dreams. If there was love or pity for him, it was only in his dreams. He woke up and fought another battle and won. Then he went to bed and slept again and dreamed again, and then he woke up and won again and slept again, and he hardly noticed when waking became sleeping, nor did he care. The next day was his last day in command school, though he didn't know it. Mazer Rackham was not in the room with him when he woke up. He showered and dressed and waited for Mazer to come and lock the door. He didn't come. Ender tried the door. It was open. Was it an accident that Mazer had let him be free this morning? No one with him to tell him he must eat, he must go to practice, he must sleep. Freedom. The trouble was, he didn't know what to do. He thought for a moment that he might find his squadron leaders, talk to them face to face, but he didn't know where they were. They could be 20 kilometers away for all he knew. So, after wandering through the tunnels for a little while, he went to the mess hall and ate breakfast near a few Marines who were telling dirty jokes that Ender could not begin to understand. Then he went to the simulator room for practice. Even though he was free, he could not think of anything else to do. Mazer was waiting for him. Ender walked slowly into the room. His step was slightly shuffling, and he felt tired and dull. Mazer frowned. Are you awake, Ender? There were other people in the simulator room. Ender wondered why they were there, but didn't bother to ask. It wasn't worth asking. No one would tell him anyway. He walked to the simulator controls and sat down, ready to start. Ender Wiggin, said Mazer, please turn around. Today's game needs a little explanation. Ender turned around. He glanced at the men gathered at the back of the room. Most of them he had never seen before. Some were even dressed in civilian clothes. He saw Anderson and wondered what he was doing there. Who was taking care of the battle school if he was gone? He saw Graff and remembered the lake in the woods outside Greensboro and wanted to go home. Take me home, he said silently to Graff. In my dream you said you loved me. Take me home. But Graff only nodded to him, a greeting, not a promise, and Anderson acted as though he didn't know him at all. Pay attention, please, Ender. Pay attention, please, Ender. Today is your final examination in command school. These observers are here to evaluate what you have learned. If you prefer not to have them in the room, we'll have them watch on another simulator. They can stay. Final examination. After today, perhaps he could rest. For this to be a fair test of your ability, not just to do what you have practiced many times, but also to meet challenges you have never seen before. Today's battle introduces a new element. It is staged around a planet. This will affect the enemy's strategy and will force you to improvise. Please concentrate on the game today. Ender beckoned Mazer closer and asked him closer. Ender beckoned Mazer closer and asked him quietly, Am I the first student to make it this far? If you win today, Ender, you will be the first student to do so. More than that, I'm not at liberty to say. Well, I'm at liberty to hear it. You can be as petulant as you want tomorrow. Today, though, I'd appreciate it if you would keep your mind on the examination. Let's not waste all that you've already done. Now, how will you deal with the planet? I have to get someone behind it, or it's a blind spot. True. And the gravity is going to affect fuel levels. Cheaper to go down than up. Yes. Does the little doctor work against the planet? Mazer's face went rigid. Ender, the buggers never deliberately attacked a civilian population in either invasion. You decide whether it would be wise to adopt a strategy that would invite reprisals. Is the planet the only new thing? Can you remember the last time I've given you a battle with only one new thing? Let me assure you, Ender, that I will not be kind to you today. I have a responsibility to the fleet not to let a second-rate student graduate. I will do my best against you, Ender, and I have no desire to coddle you. Just keep in mind everything you know about yourself and everything you know about the buggers, and you have a fair chance of amounting to something. Mazer left the room. Ender spoke into the microphone. Are you there? All of us, said Bean. Kind of late for practice this morning, aren't you? So they hadn't told the squadron leaders. Ender toyed with the idea of telling them how important this battle was to him, but decided it would not help them to have an extraneous concern on their minds. Sorry, he said, I overslept. They laughed. They didn't believe him. He led them through maneuvers, warming up for the battle ahead. It took him longer than usual to clear his mind, to concentrate on command, but soon enough he was up to speed, responding quickly, thinking well, or at least he told himself, I think that I'm thinking well. The simulator field cleared. Ender waited for the game to appear. What will happen if I pass the test today? Is there another school? Another year or two of grueling training? Another year of isolation? Another year of people pushing me this way and that way? Another year without any control over my own life? He tried to remember how old he was. 11. How many years ago did he turn 11? How many days? They must have happened here at command school, but he couldn't remember the day. Maybe he didn't even notice it at the time. Nobody noticed it, except perhaps Valentine. And as he waited for the game to appear, he wished he could simply lose it. Lose the battle badly and completely so that they would remove him from training, like Bonso, and let him go home. Bonso had been assigned to Cartagena. He had wanted to see travel orders that said Greensboro. Success meant it could go on. Failure meant he could go home. No, that isn't true, he told himself. They need me, and if I fail, there might not be any home to return to. But he did not believe it. In his conscious mind, he knew it was true, but in other places, deeper places, he doubted that they needed him. Mazer's urgency was just another trick, just another way to make me do what they want me to do, another way to keep me from resting, from doing nothing for a long, long time. Then the enemy formation appeared, and Ender's weariness turned to despair. The enemy outnumbered him 1,000 to 1. The simulator glowed green with them. They were grouped in a dozen different formations, shifting positions, changing shapes, moving in seemingly random patterns through the simulator field. He could not find a path through them. A space that seemed open would close suddenly and another appear, and a formation that seemed penetrable would suddenly change and be forbidding. The planet was at the far edge of the field, and for all Ender knew, there were just as many enemy ships beyond it, out of the simulator's range. As for his own fleet, it consisted of 20 starships, each with only 4 fighters. He knew the 4 fighter starships. They were old-fashioned, sluggish, and the range of their little doctors was half that of the newer ones. 80 fighters against at least 5,000, perhaps 10,000 enemy ships. He heard his squadron leaders breathing heavily. He could also hear, from the observers behind him, a quiet curse. It was nice to know that one of the adults noticed that it wasn't a fair test. Not that it made any difference. Fairness wasn't part of the game that was playing. There was no attempt to give him even a remote chance at success. All that I've been through, and they never meant to let me pass at all. He saw in his mind Bonso and his vicious little knot of friends confronting him, threatening him. He had been able to shame Bonso into fighting him alone. That would hardly work here, and he could not surprise the enemy with his ability, as he had done with the older boys in the battle room. Mazer knew Ender's abilities inside and out. The observers behind him began to cough, to move nervously. They were beginning to realize that Ender didn't know what to do. I don't care anymore, thought Ender. You can keep your game. If you won't even give me a chance, why should I play? Like his last game in battle school when they put two armies against him. And just as he remembered that game, apparently Bean remembered it too, for his voice came over the headset saying, "Remember, the enemy's gate is down." Molo, Soup, Vlad, Dumper, and Crazy Tom all laughed. They remembered too. And Ender also laughed. It was funny. All the adults taking all this so seriously and the children playing along, believing it too, until suddenly the adults went too far, tried too hard, and the children could see through their game. Forget it, Mazer. I don't care if I pass your test. I don't care if I follow your rules. If you can cheat, then so can I. I won't let you beat me unfairly. I'll beat you unfairly first. In that final battle in battle school, he had won by ignoring the enemy, ignoring his own losses. He had moved against the enemy's gate, and the enemy's gate was down. If I break this rule, they'll never let me be a commander. It would be too dangerous. I'll never have to play a game again, and that is victory. He whispered quickly into the microphone. His commanders took their parts of the fleet and grouped themselves into a thick projectile, a cylinder aimed at the nearest of the enemy formations. The enemy, far from trying to repel him, welcomed him in so he could be thoroughly entrapped before they destroyed him. Mazer is at least taking into account the fact that by now they would have learned to respect me, thought Ender, and that does buy me time. Ender dodged downward, north, east, and down again, not seeming to follow any plan, but always ending up a little closer to the enemy planet. Finally, the enemy began to close in on him too tightly. Then Ender's formation burst. His fleet seemed to melt into chaos. The 80 fighters seemed to follow no plan at all, firing at enemy ships at random, working their way into hopeless individual paths among the bugger craft. After a few minutes of battle, however, Ender whispered to his squadron leaders once more, and suddenly a dozen of the remaining fighters formed again into a formation. But now they were on the far side of one of the enemy's most formidable groups. They had, with terrible losses, passed through, and now they had covered more than half the distance to the enemy's planet. The enemy sees now, thought Ender. Surely Mazer sees what I'm doing. Or perhaps Mazer cannot believe that I would do it. Well, so much the better for me. Ender's tiny fleet darted this way and that, sending 2 or 3 fighters out as if to attack, then bringing them back. The enemy closed in, drawing in ships and formations that had been widely scattered, bringing them in for the kill. The enemy was most concentrated beyond Ender, so he could not escape back into open space, closing him in. Excellent, thought Ender. Closer. Come closer. Then he whispered a command, and the ships dropped like rocks toward the planet's surface. They were starships and fighters, completely unequipped to handle the heat of passage through an atmosphere. But Ender never intended them to reach the atmosphere. Almost from the moment they began to drop, they were focusing their little doctors on one thing only: the planet itself. 1, 2, 4, 7 of his fighters were blown away. It was all a gamble now whether any of his ships would survive long enough to get in range. It would not take long once they could focus on the planet's surface. Just a moment with Dr. Device, that's all I want. It occurred to Ender that perhaps the computer wasn't even equipped to show what would happen to a planet if the little doctor attacked it. What will I do then? Shout, "Bang, you're dead"? Ender took his hands off the controls and leaned in to watch what happened. The perspective was close to the enemy planet now, as the ship hurtled into its well of gravity. Surely it's in range now, thought Ender. It must be in range, and the computer can't handle it. Then the surface of the planet which filled half the simulator field now, began to bubble. There was a gout of explosion, hurling debris out toward Ender's fighters. Ender tried to imagine what was happening inside the planet, the field growing and growing, the molecules bursting apart but finding nowhere for the separate atoms to go. Within 3 seconds, the entire planet burst apart, becoming a sphere of bright dust hurtling outward. Ender's fighters were among the first to go. Their perspective suddenly vanished, and now the simulator could only display the perspective of the starships waiting beyond the edges of the battle. It was as close as Ender wanted to be. The sphere of the exploding planet grew outward faster than the enemy ships could avoid it, and it carried with it the little doctor, not so little any more. The field taking apart every ship in its path, erupting each one into a dot of light before it went on. Only at the very periphery of the simulator did the MD field weaken. 2 or 3 enemy ships were drifting away. Ender's own starships did not explode. But where the vast enemy fleet had been, and the planet they protected, there was nothing meaningful. A lump of dirt was growing as gravity drew much of the debris downward again. It was glowing hot and spinning visibly. It was also much smaller than the world had been before. Much of its mass was now a cloud, still flowing outward. Ender took off his headphones, filled with the cheers of his squadron leaders, and only then realized that there was just as much noise in the room with him. Men in uniform were hugging each other, laughing, shouting. Others were weeping. Some knelt or lay prostrate. That's on their face, like they're laid out on the floor, like on their face. And Ender knew they were caught up in prayer. Ender didn't understand. It seemed all wrong. They were supposed to be angry. Colonel Graff detached himself from the others and came to Ender. Tears streamed down his face, but he was smiling. He bent over, reached out his arms, and to Ender's surprise he embraced him, held him tightly, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you, Ender. Thank God for you, Ender." The others soon came too, shaking his hand, congratulating him. He tried to make sense of this. Had he passed the test, after all? It was his victory, not theirs, and a hollow one at that, a cheat. Why did they act as if he had won with honor? The crowd parted, and Mazer Rackham walked through. He came straight to Ender and held out his hand. "You made the hard choice, boy. All or nothing. End them, or end us. But heaven knows there was no other way you could have done it. Congratulations. You beat them, and it's all over." All over. Beat them. Ender didn't understand. "I beat you." Mazer laughed, a loud laugh that filled the room. "Ender, you never played me. You never played a game since I became your enemy." Ender didn't get the joke. He had played a great many games at a terrible cost to himself. He began to get angry. Mazer reached out and touched his shoulder. Ender shrugged him off. Mazer then grew serious and said, "Ender, Ender, for the past few months you have been the battle commander of our fleets. This was the third invasion. There were no games. The battles were real, and the only enemy you fought was the buggers. You won every battle, and today you finally fought them at their home world, where the queen was. All the queens from all their colonies, they all were there, and you destroyed them completely. They'll never attack us again. You did it. You." Real. Not a game. Ender's mind was too tired to cope with it all. They weren't just points of light in the air. They were real ships that he had fought with, and real ships he had destroyed, and a real world that he had blasted into oblivion. He walked through the crowd, dodging their congratulations, ignoring their hands, their words, their rejoicing. When he got to his own room, he stripped off his clothes, climbed into bed, and slept. Ender awoke when they shook him. It took a moment to recognize them. Graff and Rackham. He turned his back on them. Let me sleep. Ender, we need to talk to you, said Graff. Ender rolled back to face them. They've been playing out the videos on Earth all day, all night since the battle yesterday. Yesterday? He had slept through until the next day. You're a hero, Ender. They've seen what you did, you and the others. I don't think there's a government on Earth that hasn't voted you their highest medal. I killed them all, didn't I? Ender asked. All who? Asked Graff. The buggers? That was the idea. Mazer leaned in close. That's what the war was for. All their queens. So I killed all their children, all of everything. They decided that when they attacked us. It wasn't your fault. It's what had to happen. Ender grabbed Mazer's uniform and hung on to it, pulling him down so they were face to face. I didn't want to kill them all. I didn't want to kill anybody. I'm not a killer. You didn't want me, you jerks. You wanted Peter, but you made me do it. You tricked me into it. He was crying. He was out of control. Of course we tricked you into it. That's the whole point, said Graff. It had to be a trick or you couldn't have done it. It's the bind we were in. We had to have a commander with so much empathy that he would think like the buggers, understand them, and anticipate them. So much compassion that he could win the love of his underlings and work with them like a perfect machine, as perfect as the buggers. But somebody with that much compassion could never be the killer we needed, could never go into battle willing to win at all costs. If you knew you couldn't do it, if you were the kind of person who would do it, even if you knew, you could never have understood the buggers well enough. And it had to be a child, Ender, said Mazer. You were faster than me, better than me. I was too old and cautious. Any decent person who knows what warfare is can never go into battle with a whole heart. But you didn't know. We made sure you didn't know. You were reckless and brilliant and young. It's what you were born for. We had pilots with our ships, didn't we? Yes. I was ordering pilots to go in and die, and I didn't even know it. They knew it, Ender, and they went anyway. They knew what it was for. You never asked me. You never told me the truth about anything. You had to be a weapon, Ender, like a gun, like the little doctor, functioning perfectly but not knowing what you were aimed at. We aimed you. We're responsible. If there was something wrong, we did it. Tell me later, Ender said, his eyes closed. Mazer Rackham shook him. Don't go to sleep, Ender, he said. It's very important. You're finished with me, Ender said. Now leave me alone. That's why we're here, Mazer said. We're trying to tell you. They're not through with you, not at all. It's crazy down there. They're going to start a war. Americans claiming the Warsaw Pact is about to attack, and the Russians are saying the same thing about the hegemon. The bugger war isn't 24 hours dead, and the world down there is back to fighting again, as bad as ever. And all of them are worried about you. All of them want you. The greatest military leader in history, they want you to lead their armies. The Americans, the hegemon, everybody but the Warsaw Pact, and they want you dead. Fine with me, said Ender. We have to take you away from here. There are Russian Marines all over Eros, and the pole march is Russian. It could turn to bloodshed at any time. Ender turned his back on them again. This time they let him. He did not sleep, though. He listened to them. I was afraid of this, Rackham. You pushed him too hard. Some of those lesser outposts could have waited until after. You could have given him some days to rest. Are you doing it too, Graf? Trying to decide how I could have done it better? You don't know what would have happened if I hadn't pushed. Nobody knows. I did it the way I did it, and it worked. Above all, it worked. Memorize that defense, Graf. You may have to use it too. Sorry. I can see what it's done to him. Colonel Lickey says there's a good chance he'll be permanently damaged, but I don't believe it. He's too strong. Winning meant a lot to him, and he won. Don't tell me about strong. The kid's 11. Give him some rest, Rackham. Things haven't exploded yet. We can post a guard outside his door. Or post a guard outside another door and pretend it's his. Whatever. They went away. Ender slept again. Time passed without touching Ender, except with glancing blows. Once he awoke for a few minutes with something pressing his hand, pushing downward on it with a dull, insistent pain. He reached over and touched it. It was a needle pressing into a vein. He tried to pull it out, but it was taped on, and he was too weak. Another time he awoke in darkness to hear people near him murmuring and cursing. His ears were ringing with the loud noise that had awakened him. He did not remember the noise. "Get the lights on," someone said. And another time he thought he heard someone crying softly near him. It might have been a single day. It might have been a week. From his dreams, it could have been months. He seemed to pass through lifetimes in his dreams. Through the giant's drink again, past the wolf children, reliving the terrible deaths, the constant murders. He heard a voice whispering in the forest, "You had to kill the children to get to the end of the world." And he tried to answer, "I never wanted to kill anybody. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to kill anybody." But the forest laughed at him, and when he leapt from the cliff at the end of the world, sometimes it was not clouds that caught him, but a fighter that carried him to a vantage point near the surface of the bugger's world, so he could watch over and over the eruption of death when Dr. Device set off a reaction on the planet's face, then closer and closer until he could watch individual buggers explode, turn to light, then collapse into a pile of dirt before his eyes. And the queen, surrounded by infants, only the queen was mother, and the infants were Valentine and all the children he had known in battle school. One of them had Bonso's face, and he lay there bleeding through the eyes and nose, saying, "You have no honor." And always the dream ended with a mirror or a pool of water or the metal surface of a ship, something that would reflect his face back to him. At first it was always Peter's face, with blood and a snake's tail coming from the mouth. After a while, though, it began to be his own face, old and sad, with eyes that grieved for a billion murders. But they were his own eyes, and he was content to wear them. That was the world Ender lived in for many lifetimes during the 5 days of the League War. When he awoke again, he was lying in darkness. In the distance, he could hear the thump, thump of explosions. He listened for a while, then he heard a soft footstep. He turned over and flung out a hand to grasp whoever was sneaking up on him. Sure enough, he caught someone's clothing and pulled him down toward his knees, ready to kill him if need be. "Ender, it's me, it's me!" He knew the voice. It came out of his memory as if it were a million years ago. A lie. "Salaam, pinprick. What were you trying to do? Kill me?" "Yes, I thought you were trying to kill me. I was trying not to wake you up. Well, at least you have some survival instinct left. The way Mazer talks about it, you were becoming a vegetable." "I was trying to. What's the thumping?" "There's a war going on out there. Our section is blacked out to keep us safe." Ender swung his legs out to sit up. He couldn't do it, though. His head hurt too bad. He winced in pain. "Don't sit up, Ender. It's all right. It looks like we might win it. Not all the Warsaw Pact people went with the Pole March. A lot of them came over when the Strategos told them you were loyal to the IF." "I was asleep." "So he lied. You weren't plotting treason in your dreams, were you? Some of the Russians who came in told us that when the Pole—" "Mm-mm. Yeah, some of the Russians who came in told us that when the Pole March ordered them to find you and kill you, they almost killed him. Whatever they may feel about other people, Ender, they love you. The whole world watched our battles, videos, day and night. I've seen some, complete with your voice giving the orders. It's all there, nothing censored. Good stuff. You've got a career in the vids. I don't think so, said Ender. I was joking. Hey, can you believe it? We won the war. We were so eager to grow up so we could fight in it, and it was us all the time. I mean, we're kids, Ender, and it was us. Eli laughed. It was you, anyway. You were good, Bosch. I didn't know how you'd get us out of that last one, but you did. You were good. Ender noticed the way he spoke in the past. I was good. What am I now? Eli? Still good? At what? At anything. There's a million soldiers who'd follow you to the end of the universe. I don't want to go to the end of the universe. So where do you want to go? They'll follow you. I want to go home, thought Ender, but I don't know where it is. The thumping went silent. Listen to that, said Eli. They listened. The door opened. Someone stood there. Someone small. It's over, he said. It was Bean. As if to prove it, the lights went on. "Ho, Bean," Ender said. "Ho, Ender." Petra followed him in, with Dink holding her hand. They came to Ender's bed. "Hey, the hero's awake," said Dink. "Who won?" asked Ender. "We did, Ender," said Bean. "You were there." "He's not that crazy, Bean. He meant who won just now." Petra took Ender's hand. "There was a truce on Earth. They've been negotiating for days. They finally agreed to accept the Locke proposal." He doesn't know about the Locke proposal. It's very complicated, but what it means here is that the IF will stay in existence, but without the Warsaw Pact in it. So the Warsaw Pact Marines are going home. I think Russia agreed to it because they're facing a revolt of the Islamic states. Everybody's got troubles. About 500 died here, but it was worse on Earth. The hegemon resigned, said Dink. It's crazy down there. Who cares? You okay? Petra asked him, touching his head. You scared us. They said you were crazy. We said, They said you were crazy, and we said they were crazy. I'm crazy, said Ender, but I think I'm okay. When did you decide that? Asked Eli. When I thought you were about to kill me, and I decided to kill you first. I guess I'm just a killer to the core, but I'd rather be alive than dead. They laughed and agreed with him. Then Ender began to cry and embraced Bean and Petra, who were closest. I missed you, he said. I wanted to see you so bad. You saw us pretty bad, Petra answered. She kissed his cheek. I saw you magnificent, said Ender. The ones I needed most, I used up soonest. Bad planning on my part. Everybody's okay now, said Dink. Nothing was wrong with any of us that 5 days of cowering in blacked out rooms in the middle of a war couldn't cure. I don't have to be your commander anymore, do I? Asked Ender. I don't want to command anybody ever again. You don't have to command anybody, said Dink, but you're always our commander. Then they were silent for a while. So, what do we do now? Asked Eli. The bugger war's over, and so's the war down there on Earth, and even the war here. What do we do now? We're kids, said Petra. They'll probably make us go to school. It's a law. You have to go to school till you're 17. They all laughed at that, laughed until tears streamed down their faces.